So a few, are doing bang-up jobs. So y'all just sit back and feel smug for the next 30 minutes. But the rest of you, I am onto you. You are doing a mediocre job. You are being meek. You are publishing data because somebody told you that you have to. You came here today because somebody told you that you need to come here. Maybe your work is mediocre because of you, or maybe, and by maybe I mean probably, you are working under difficult circumstances. But I can't separate out you, the human, from you, the government open data program. So buckle up. So hey, you have an open data site. Your data was closed, now it's open. You're enjoying long walks on the beach with your open data. You and open data, you're making some long-term plans and maybe talking about settling down and buying a server together. Oh, hell no. No, I've seen your websites. Some of your websites are populated entirely by the data sets that Socrata's tech team grabbed off your website when you first signed up with them. Most of your sites have very little data that's of any value to anybody. Any of this sound familiar? 2009 election turnout by precinct for the 3rd district. There's a data set. Building permits issued between February 5, 2008 and July 12, 2009. Licensed horse stables in the 26th House District. I'm not making these up. Any of these sound familiar? They should to some of y'all. You inflate your data set count by breaking one file into 80 pieces. Ever done that? You have no idea of who your audience is. Who are you opening this data for? You have no clear goals or planned outcomes for your open data efforts. So how will you know it's working? Easy. You won't. So let's look at a few sites, a few open data portals that I've picked more or less at random, although there was some cream skimming. Let's start with Vermont. I started with that because I was up in Vermont this summer speaking to a conference there about the statewide open data efforts. And again, I just got to remind you periodically, this is all delivered with love. It's love, people. Vermont. So you go to data.vermont.gov, they got 50 records. Okay, they've just gotten started, I get it. But once you ignore the test data sets and the duplicate records, and the things that aren't data, they're just charts or filter views based on data sets or internal things, there are 10. There are 10 data sets for the state of Vermont. On average, just one update is made to any of their data sets each month. And most of the data that I have here is probably of very little value to anybody at all. There are, and here's the crazy thing, there are vast quantities of data available through vermont.gov. It's scattered all over their site. They're just not on their repository. This is not a good system. So it includes things like election results, state GIS data, localities GIS data, detailed education data from localities and from across the state. They're not there. So this seems like trouble. So imagine you're a Vermont citizen and you think, well, I want data about Vermont. Well, of course, I'm going to go to data.vermont.gov. And if it's not there, you reasonably conclude, oh, this data isn't available. Oh, it probably is. Just nobody bothered to put it on the site. The whole site is a bolt-on. It's evidence that somebody was checking an open data box and moving on. Madison, Wisconsin. Madison, nice looking website, 87 records, 44 actual data sets. Some are pretty good. Parcel assessments, police incident reports, parks, bus stops, I mean, good stuff, but it drops off pretty quickly. 26 data sets are voter turnout records. One file per election instead of being combined into a voter turnout file. So it's not 87 data sets, but just 19 for a city of 250,000 people. But again, about 10 of those data sets are pretty solidly useful, he said, straining to hit a positive note. Michigan, 101 records. All right, 71 data sets. Those data sets seem to be an effort of maybe 3 state agencies exclusively. It's clear most agencies just have no interest in this. It's a narrow slice of the state. But I mention them because they win the award for the most dubious data set award. No, I don't object to lizard data, honestly, and I'm not kidding in any way. We probably need more lizard data. And I know I'm smirking, but I'm totally serious. I think it's great that they're putting native lizard species on here. But I don't know that a single row CSV file really counts as a data set. Datum set? Can that be a thing? A datum set? Raleigh, North Carolina. They have 689 records. Awesome. That sounds great. Well, 120 of those are actually data sets. And once you whittle away all the things that aren't really data sets, there are 31. And the fall off, 120 to 31, that comes from the fiscal year 13 proposed fiscal year 14 budget, which they've atomized into 86 files. They really got the count up. So they only have 4% of the claimed 689 that you see on the homepage. You're like puffer fish, inflating your data sets so your open data program will look fearsome. And maybe this is to look good to the public, but I think, and I'm pretty sure most of you all agree, it's to look good internally. You need to show impact, and big numbers are a great way to fake that. There's a commitment gap. That's what we see. Governments talk a good game about open data. And by governments, I don't mean y'all. I mean, it's people above you, almost inherently, often elected officials. They want to talk a lot about open data, even if they don't know what they're talking about, because it sounds good and it looks good, and there's ways to make it appeal to Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals and God knows libertarians. But then they provide little to no money or resources to back that up, which the libertarians like. Some of you here are lone wolves. Your agency is humoring you by letting you do this open data stuff. And in fact, you raise your hand if you're the only person in your agency or government doing anything to publish open data. One, two, three, yes, a smattering. All right, that's pretty good. And in part because this is a Socrata gathering. It's a serious bunch of people here. Raise your hand if your open data budget is just really small. So some people will confess to this. All right, it's about a quarter. Raise your hand if you basically blew your budget coming here today. Is there anybody? Okay. Is there anybody? Is there anybody here who literally has no budget for open data? Anybody? One brave soul. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. That is not unusual. In most gatherings, that's the norm. It's just that y'all are special in that you're from governments that have shown a commitment by A, working with Socrata, and B, coming here. Often, though, you'll find that is not standard. And even here, I guarantee you that most of y'all, there's a lot that you'd like to do, or that you could do if you had more resources, certainly if your resources matched the talk that often comes from your higher-ups about open data. The effect of all of these problems is that you're producing open data for no concrete reason with no measurable goals or outcomes. That's the only way to explain this mess. And the number of data sets is not a goal or outcome. It's just not. So what are your success stories? And the one I hear the most frequently is, oh, some random guys made an app using one of your data sets. That's adorable. So somebody built an app with our data is not the highest use of your data. In fact, it's pretty lousy because 99% of apps, whatever those even are crap, including the apps that are made with your data. So I mean, look at what often happens. I often have governments ask me, should we hold a hackathon? Should we have an apps contest? And my answer is almost always, oh my God, no. Please don't do that. These are events that can be useful, but never for the stated purpose. Hackathons are useful if you want to get a bunch of people together to provide feedback about your API and your data and to get to know each other, but the outcome of that is not going to be helpful. Apps contests almost never are, because the ability to do something, to have the time in the first place to do something at a sprint for a couple of weeks to make an app, you've already selected a pretty narrow range of people, and the outcome of that is the thing that seems clever to judges, but it's never maintained. Nobody ever uses it. What's more important is to get data to people where they are. So if you have a clever app contest, which emerges an Android app with restaurant inspections. So when you go to a restaurant, you can fire it up and it'll tell you this place is disgusting, get out of here. That's great, but not many people are going to download it, and not many people are going to think to actually use it when they're in a restaurant. You have to go to people where they are. That means the data needs to be in Foursquare or Yelp or Google. So when you look up that restaurant at Yelp, it says, oh my God, don't eat there, don't. The health department says it's disgusting. That's a lot more helpful than waiting until you have your table. Oh, excuse me, I need to go, I made a terrible decision, sorry. Thanks for the bread and water. Apps contests tend to yield things like this. They look very nice, but they're almost always useless. And that, over and over again, becomes the stated evidence that an open data program is useful. Oh, no, some apps were made. I don't care. That's not a useful outcome. I'll make a side note about usefulness. So last night, I was in my hotel room at, do not kid, it's probably 11 o'clock at night. You can see my GitHub commit and you'll know for sure. Working on open cattle brand data. I have no idea why I'm publishing this data. This is not for work. This is my idea of a hobby. I got a PDF from Virginia of all of the registered cattle brands, because you brand your cattle, like it's of no good unless it's in a central registry that says, the CW ranch is owned by this person who lived this place, and if you find these cattle, it belongs to that person. So Virginia has that, like many states, but it's just a PDF. So I'm OCRing the PDF. I'm going to convert the actual brand images, which are hand-drawn, into scalable vector graphics. I'm going to render it all as JSON and set up a bespoke website. I have no idea of what value this is to anybody. Probably nobody. I don't care. That's actually my idea of a good time because there's something wrong with me, and I'm OK with that. But this is a hobby. I'm allowed to have no idea why I'm publishing open data. You need to have a reason of why you're doing it. Do you decide what data to publish by consulting quasi-random 20-somethings? Stop. Stop doing that. That's a practice that's become pretty common. In doing so, you ask experts to ignore their own expertise. So here's what I see happens. You see somebody say in a state government, say, oh, yeah, we really think the transportation and transit data, like those are really going to be big. And so we found some programmers who are a group of friends who are like 23, 24 years old, and we've asked them what data they want for transit and transportation data, and we're going to release that. And we think they're going to do something with it because they're programmers, and they seem really smart. That is really insulting because there's probably a state transportation agency with hundreds of experts in transportation who work in that agency, and dozens or hundreds of experts in transit who work in that agency who know what people want. They know what data is useful. They know what people ask for. They know what people should ask for, but they don't. They know what data is reliable and unreliable, what other agencies need, and so on. But instead, and I've been that 20-whatever-year-old guy who was brought in and didn't realize at the time that, like, this is terrible, what I'm doing to actual experts in this area. It's like this Harry Potter phenomenon of like, oh, they say I'm brilliant, I must be. I'll give them my sage advice about transit data, which I never considered the existence of until yesterday. But this has become like a reasonable practice, the belief that programmers are wizards, and their knowledge therefore surpasses that of the actual experts who run these agencies or who are departments or who people them. So this is somewhere between a waste of resources and humiliating. Just envision how you would feel if your agency head or mayor or secretary or governor or whatever brought in a college student who advised you to scrap Socrata and instead build a bespoke data repository in Visual Basic, and then you were obliged to do so. Like, you'd be pissed, right? But that's the system that we're putting in place right now for how we all too frequently decide what data sets to value. Do you decide what data to post based on what's easy? That's actually, at first, that's fine. If you're just starting a data repository, that's a totally reasonable way to start, but you'd best have just launched your data repository. What's easy to obtain is generally unrelated to what's useful. If it's already easy to obtain, then really what value are you providing here? I get that you're looking for metrics to prove that you're doing good work and you want big numbers, and that's fine, but we all know that's not really how the utility or a decent outcome really for measuring the value of a data set or of a data repository. And the time's going to come, here's the trick, the time's going to come when you're going to be judged on outcomes rather than counts of data sets. And that time could be soon. So you do yourself no favors by picking all the low-hanging fruit first, because adding those numbers is going to get harder and harder as you go. Have you ever picked fruit, like not for fun, but like actually like put in a day's work picking fruit? Because the thing is, if you start at the bottom of the tree, your bag gets really heavy as you climb the tree. That's technical debt that you're assessing in programming terms. Easy is a trap and is something to be avoided. How are you updating data sets? Is it somebody's job to periodically upload updated files to Socrata one by one? Don't do that. Don't do that. Use the publisher API, use data sync, use safe FME. You have lots of options through Socrata to automate this. If it's not automated, it's an unsustainable simulation of open data. Every new data set that you add to your site creates additional technical debt. And eventually, all of your resources will go to updates and zero to adding new data. You got to automate it when you add these things. It also fails the hit by a bus test. I suspect there are a bunch of y'all here. If you were hit by a bus tomorrow, your organization's open data program would, if not disappear, certainly be in trouble for a long time. You got to automate these things so that they can last. There's also, of course, the decent possibility of budget cuts in this space. There may be a point, I think there's likely to be a point, when some government starts saying, we don't really see the magic savings or benefits of open data, and so we're going to scale back your funding. Well, if you've automated the update of your system, that's all right. It should be able to keep running. That's OK. But if you haven't, then your open data becomes a repository becomes a ghost town. So if it's not automated, it's simulated. Your open data site is almost certainly a ghetto. It's not for you. It's for others. And you expect those others to do things to use that data that you would never tolerate if you were the audience for the data, if you were consuming that data. Things like complex column mappings without any documentation of what those columns mean or what they do. Reliance on foreign keys that are never defined. Typos and primary keys. Interconnectedness with other data sets that aren't open. If you're the owner of the data set, none of these might seem like problems. But to somebody who's encountering this data from the first time from the outside, it is baffling, and you've doomed them to live in this area of data in which they're using the bad stuff while you get the good stuff. So here are 5 things that you can do with open data that, face it, almost none of you are doing. Number 1, actually list your data. Include all of the data sets that are already scattered all around your website. This isn't real hard. Just search your site for CSV, XML, JSON files, etc. It's entirely possible that you are publishing a bunch of data and you don't even know it. So I mean, as you can see in the case of Vermont, they've got, 1,300 data sets compared to the, 10 that we saw? Now, a lot of these you would not actually list, but still, even if 90% of them are noise, that's a huge amount of data that is just missing. So you can search your site for those. It's not hard. That's just a basic trick that I use to find data that isn't a repository, is searching for the file type or searching for an extension and see what I can yield. If this is a more comprehensive list of your data sets than your actual repository, you've done something terribly wrong. And I have bad news. This is probably a more comprehensive list of data sets than your actual open data repository. Also, another thing to include that's just real easy up front is data from other levels of government. So localities also include federal and state level data that's about your locality. States include federal data that's about your state and all the data from localities repositories within your state. And there's a lot of it. There's a couple reasons why this is valuable, but it really centers on the notion that most citizens don't have the concept or the relationship or the understanding of government that you and I do. Most of us are aware of what federal government does and what state government does and what local government does. And when we have a problem that requires government intervening, we know who to go to. We understand that what Medicare is versus Medicaid and who administers each program and who funds it and when you want to talk to your congressman versus your state legislator and so on. This all makes sense to us. To most people, this makes absolutely no sense. And this extends to data. They don't know that if they're, imagine somebody looking to start a restaurant and they want to know what regulations affect them. Well, they have no way of knowing what regulations are local, like the Board of Architecture might have say over how the restaurant looks, which ones are state-based. So the state regulations would be about food safety almost certainly, but that might also be local. And which ones are federal, like hiring practices, for instance. People don't know this. So for data repositories, if you could syndicate data from other levels of government and put them in one place, put them in all the places, why not? Put it in the local repository, put it in the state, put it in the federal, whatever affects the audience that for your site in the realm of data, that should all be there. But also, it's really easy. Socrata makes this absolutely trivial to do. I was looking last night at Maryland's Socrata repository, and a lot of their data sets are syndicated from Baltimore. And just as you're browsing through, it tells you quite clearly which ones are syndicated from Baltimore. I didn't see that and think, oh, they're cheating. But, oh, that's very useful. I'm looking for data on Maryland. Why wouldn't that include Baltimore? As a bonus, of course, Maryland gets to really increase their count of valuable data sets. But this is really useful for citizens. Number 2, let your experts be experts. Let agencies and departments determine which data sets they should publish based on their own experience and judgment, because they really, really know this stuff. And whenever possible, and I know this can be hard politically, whenever you can transcend the leadership structure and go right to the people who actually do the work in those agencies, that's really helpful. And often it's the tech types, it's the programmers, it's the people who don't normally interface with the public or other agencies because they're seen as too green or too socially inept or whatever. They really know what people want and what they use. Also, I frequently see in agencies there will be, and it's almost always a woman, who has been in that agency for her entire career, and she's the one who actually does the work of managing data. Whatever the CIO says he does, or the CTO, whatever they say they do, often the can has been kicked down the road to this woman who manages that because she knows the data cold, because she started working there when she was 22, and she's been there for 40 years. And if you can find that woman, by God, she's gold. Like, that's the person who really knows the data. Good luck, particularly in state agencies. I seem to encounter this really routinely. That woman's always, if you can get her on your side, she knows all about the data, and she can be the real expert. So work within the hierarchy and find the actual leaders. But if you can poke around a bit for the incooperative agencies, the agencies that don't actually return your phone calls, the agencies that don't follow the mandate that's been provided by the governor or by the mayor or whatever, you find the people who actually control the power, and it's frequently not who you think. But for the totally non-cooperative agencies, they are their own problem. I cannot help you. Good luck. Of the cooperative agencies, though, they might need help because they may not be used to an open mindset. And so I want to tell you briefly about the story of Virginia and their government hackathon. When the Secretary of Technology's office told me a few months ago in Virginia that they wanted to hold a hackathon, I said, please, God, no. And they said, no, it's going to be great. I said, yeah, they say that every time. Don't do it. They said, no, you don't understand. We're having a government hackathon. I said, I know, that's the thing I object to. They said, no. We're only inviting people who work in agencies. And I said, go on. So there are no random people from the public like me showing up and hacking at this 2-day event that they had. Instead, they invited all agencies, and I think 5 sent groups of 4 people apiece. They set up for 2 days. Some brought in like their desktop computers and their monitors, like they seriously settled into this ballroom. And they were given free rein with the basic mission of you can only use public data sets that anybody can get access to in Virginia, and you need to use data sets from, at least one of your data sets has to be from another agency, not your own. Have at it. Now, this is eye-opening. I remember the first time that I tried to consume one of my websites, public APIs, which I thought was great. It was terrible, and I just didn't know it, because I never had to do it. So for these agencies, when they found themselves having to consume their own APIs and APIs from other agencies, it was a good lesson in what they thought was available but wasn't, or data that they had internally that they were used to relying on, but it turns out actually is not available to the public. This was a good model in how to educate some of those experts, or at least their proxies, in who they might know what data is available, but it might not be quite as good as they think. I was totally wrong about having said never do a hackathon. It turns out there are clever ways to do hackathons that work well, and I think the all-government employee hackathon model is a great one. And they had apps come out of it, but it wasn't the point. The point wasn't to make apps or new websites or anything. It was to get these people using their data and using other people's data. Number 3, don't eat dog food. Please don't eat dog food. Drink your own champagne. For most types of data, you don't know who's going to use it or for what. There's no user group to consult with. There's no reliable feedback mechanism to be extrapolated on to represent the interests of a larger audience. So you have no way of knowing if what you're doing is useful. But you do have internal systems for feedback. Within government already, you have internal stakeholders, you have subject matter experts and producers and consumers of data within government. If budgeting is producing data that's useless to accounting, they're going to hear about it. So work within this system. So like, how are you sharing data within your government, between agencies and other levels of government? And I can answer the question for you. There's basically 2 ways that almost all of you are sharing data. The first is, yeah, I think it's on the H drive or maybe the P drive, I don't know. And then there's some hierarchy of folders that somebody set up in 2001, not realizing it would define the structure of your data for years to come internally, or you have to plumb around until you find the mysteriously named Excel file that actually has the data that you want. That's one way. The second is you walk down the hall and you knock on Cindy's door and, hey, Cindy, my favorite database administrator, I need some data. Can you get it to me? Here's the thumb drive. Can you email it to me? There's this belief among open data types who have never worked for government that you guys have these secret internal data repositories, like Socrata, but internal and just for you, and it's where you keep everything. And all your documents are there and revisions, and you can search it. And if you would just take that system and open it up to the public, all of our open data woes would be over. And they really, really believe this. And sometimes they're shocked to find out that, no, no, people in government maintain their data just like, I mean, some of y'all have SharePoint, and that's a step up. But generally, how you share data internally is not so good. Here's an idea. If there's no confidentiality or PII concerns, put that stuff up on your data portal. Put it up in Socrata. Create your data store for yourselves. Here's my radical proposal. Not for the public. When you and your governments, your member agencies, whatever, need data, you get it from your data store. And if it's not on your data store, get it up there and then use it. And regard it as a happy byproduct that the public gets to have it too. This is a sustainable, sensible system that makes it easier for people in government to find data. It provides you with the appropriate incentive to put it up there. And now you have an actual place to keep your data too, instead of scattered across a bunch of randomly lettered drives. Put your data first. Publish your data first, build something on top of it second. This is the fourth thing that I want you to do. If you need data to drive your website or your iPhone app or an internet widget or whatever, you have to open the data first and then draw from the same well as everybody else. Be your own client. So you publish your data sets and then your iPhone app downloads it from the assigned Socrata URL. Build a public API and then your website consumes it and so on. Get rid of your two-tier system where you get the good stuff and everybody else gets second-class data. Number 5, instead of pulling ideas for useful data sets out of the ether, what might people find useful? Instead, look at what other governments are publishing, use that as a menu, and then benchmark yourself against it. So this is the US City Open Data Census, the Code for America, the Sunlight Foundation, the Open Knowledge Foundation put together and maintains. It lists 19 core data sets and reports how available and open each one of them are in different cities. And it is city focused, but even if you're not with a city, it's still a pretty good collection of examples of valuable data. Use this as a yardstick. So if you're with a municipal government, you can add yourself and self-disclose what you're doing well and badly on this site. And again, you Google for US City Open Data Census and you can find the site. Don't limit yourself to these types of data, of course. There's much, much more to be opened. This is pretty narrow, but it's a good start. So to recap, I want you to list all of your data. I want you to value your colleagues' expertise. I want you to be your own user. I want you to publish data before you use that data. And then I want you to publicly rank how well you're doing as you use that yardstick of success. Despite everything I've said here, I am, when I'm talking about your work publicly, outside of this, I've never given a talk like this before. I've never spoken to a group of exclusively people who work and open within government. When I talk about your work publicly, I'm going to describe it in glowing terms by finding out what you are doing well and promoting that, because that's my job. And maybe we can do this again next year, and then perhaps I'll be able to lead with this slide instead. Let's talk. Or yell at me, or whatever you need.
Any questions?
Or did everything I say was just so agreeable, there's just nothing to possibly object to? I get that a lot. God, I'm brilliant. Oh, no.
Will Saunders, State of Washington, great census. Do you have a census for states? And is there a difference between what data sets are important for cities and what data sets are important for states?
There is no equivalent site for states yet. I'd love for it to exist. I'm kind of worried it actually might be my problem to make it exist. So maybe it's my fault. It doesn't exist yet. States just do more things than cities do in many cases. That said, when you look at really big cities, which you'd see on that rundown, let me go back here. It's a little blurry, but anyway, when you look at really big cities, New York, San Francisco, Boston, Atlanta, they tend to do things that states might do in other places because they're so large. They might have more regulatory authority, more oversight. So you might look to them as good examples. But I'm afraid I don't know, and again, I guess this is another thing that is my problem to do, of any canonical list of here are the things that states should be doing. But a pretty good start is trying to check off all of those lists. I appreciate things like transit don't really apply to states. There are very few, there are some, but very few state-run transit agencies, for instance. They tend to be municipal creatures. You can still syndicate that data from localities, but I get that it's not your problem. So sorry for an unsatisfactory but truthful answer.
One up here.
Hi, Waldo. Mariko Davidson. We've spoke on the phone a few times. Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You know, you brought up the point about if you Google, you know, XML files, you'll find a bunch of them, but they're not on the state or the city portal. You know, one of the one of the challenges that we're running into is the legal piece of it. Even though agencies and departments have to publish their own data and it's open to the public, when we're starting our open data portal at the state level, we're still having to go through some sort of legal process to publish it on the state portal, which is a redundancy, and it seems silly. But that's just the process that we're up against right now, and I'm curious to hear if you have any feedback on that.
Yes, so I hear this every so often. I have only heard it from state governments. I've never heard it from municipal or from federal government. And I ask the same question there that I ask anytime somebody says, oh, nope, there's a rule that prevents this. I ask, hey, can you show me the rule? I've never been shown that rule. I just, yeah, I'll find it and I'll get back to you. Okay? And there's never really, it turns out it's a norm. It might be politically necessary. It might be the political reality that you can't publish a data set from elsewhere on a centralized website if you don't have the governor behind you, say, in the case of Massachusetts, giving you the authority to do so. I'm yet to encounter an actual policy, law, or rule anywhere that says that you can't do that. So I used to be with the White House Office of Science Technology Policy, and they had brought me on to create a website called ethics.gov that brings together federal ethics data from across 2 branches of government on one website. When the president promised this on the campaign trail in 2008, he was not aware that you can't just take Congress's data and put it on the White House's website. It makes them angry. But they hired me knowing that I was an idiot, and I had no idea that you can't just do that. I mean, you can. There's no law or rule against it, but everybody who tried to do it had been told, oh no, you can't do that. Well, I didn't know better, so I just did it. And because I didn't ask anybody, because I didn't care, I didn't intend to pursue a career in Washington, I couldn't get in trouble with anybody, and then the site was finished, and everything's fine, and nothing crumbled. Nobody was fired, and I was only there for 6 months to do this anyway, so I didn't even know at the time you weren't supposed to do it. It was until I left that people were like, that was so nervy. I was like, that was nervy. What are we talking about? I had no idea. I speculate, I don't know because I certainly don't know Massachusetts law. I speculate that if you keep asking, show me the rule, show me the rule, show me the rule, you may find that rule does not exist. I should ask, have you actually, I shouldn't make these assumptions, have you actually seen such a rule or policy? Okay.
I haven't seen any rules or policies, but our general counsel is, risk adverse. Yeah,
aren't they all? That's their job. Yeah.
I mean, that's
sure.
Yeah, that's just the name of the game.
Yep. Keep asking.
My name is Jonathan. I'm with the state of Missouri. The question I had, you talked about working more with local and federal data regarding your state and going up and down. We've had some success, working with our municipalities, but I'm curious, with your direct involvement, what are the federal resources? What are the federal contacts that we should be making to get specific data sets to show? Yep.
You want to go to data.gov team and you want to talk to Rebecca Williams. I believe her address, God, I hope I have this right, is rebecca.williams@gsa.gov. Rebecca was long with the Sunlight Foundation, and she just moved a couple months ago over to work on the data.gov team, and her job is to provide outreach like that to states to help them. It is also my job as well, by the way, for anybody who needs help with open data efforts, they've run into obstacles, technical problems, whatever. It is the job of me and my organization to, if not help you, at least direct you to resources that can help you answer your questions. So yes, Rebecca Williams, data.gov.
Hello, Waldo. I'm David McClure with NOAA.
Oh yeah.
Hi.
I was just talking about you last night. How
really?
That?
Really? That's why my ears were burning, I guess. So, as you know, we're undertaking a major effort to move our very substantial amounts of data out into a public cloud to provide, access to the public and economic growth and so forth. What thoughts do you have about dealing with the cost of doing this? And, we're taking an innovative approach where the private sector is saying it's worth it enough to them that they'll front the money for it. But without going through the whole analysis, it ends up boiling down to this: is there a way that it's reasonable for the public to pay the pure access cost, the minimum access cost? I'd be interested in any thoughts or experience you have in that.
So I'm told, I don't have any open data experience in Europe, but I'm told that there are two paradigms here. There's the US paradigm of we expect data to be free, period. In fact, it's built into our US definition, the very definition that I repeat of open data, and it's available without cost. However, there's a model that apparently exists in parts of Europe in which it's expected that you're going to have to pay something for that data. And it's not a profit center, it's just here's what it costs us to produce that data, so here's what it costs you to consume it. And so on the scale of an API, it might be like any other paid API, a geocoding API where it's a 1/10 of a cent per request or something. I desire to have the sort of funding for open data in the United States in which that is covered by taxpayer dollars. That we just see that much like our roads, say, unless you're libertarian and you believe otherwise, but many people believe that things like roads should be covered by taxpayer dollars and that it is part of our public infrastructure. And likewise, the data infrastructure of APIs and so on should also be covered by taxpayer dollars. I think that's the ideal that I want to shoot for. But if we get to the point, as I think we may, as I mentioned earlier, where the hype of open data is seen, rightly or wrongly, to have been greater than the reality, or we haven't had enough time for the reality of open data to take effect, that we might see budgets cut where, yes, of course, as with FOIA requests as well. With a FOIA request, that in many states, all states, I don't know, and certainly the federal government, there can be a reasonable charge for the actual cost of fulfilling that request. Now, some people would say that's used punitively, that's used to prevent data from being released. I understand that it's not perfect, but I think that's a model that we can look to because there are agencies at all levels of government with data that should be released and should be available, but the money's not there. It's great to say in the abstract that should be seen as a public resource, that should be a public good, it should be free. Okay, but who's going to allocate the funding? And if that doesn't happen, if we don't see, God, I was going to say if we don't see Congress taking action, of course Congress won't take action. If something doesn't happen to facilitate this, I mean, we have dedicated transportation funding. Why do we not have dedicated funding to provide our, I'm going to slip into Al Gore 1992 mode here, for the information superhighway? How do we not have equivalent funding to support that data transfer? I think quite likely we won't. And then I think we're going to see agencies having to fall back on the FOIA model of, look, if you want bulk data, that's free. If you want our API, you sign up for an API key and you're rate limited or whatever. But if you're going to be hitting our API 1 million times a day, 10 million times a day, sorry, we've got to charge you. We can't afford this otherwise. And I think that's just a realistic approach that will be politically difficult. But I don't think there's any getting around that it's likely to be the reality. God, that's depressing. All right.
Hi, Waldo. My name is Tim Abdalla. I'm with DC government.
Oh,
and
hello, Tim. I'm speaking to a DC government event this evening.
Great. The BAGA one?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
So I'm relatively new to the field, and I guess I don't know who you are or the group that you work for and why that matters. And I know that's
it doesn't,
off, but it was a great presentation.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear a little more about who you are and the group you work for, and if you didn't start with that in your presentation, if that's okay.
Sure. I usually don't talk about myself because I think I'm boring. I'm an open data geek. Long before we had the phrase open data, have been working to open data. It started as a teenager when my city wanted to pass a youth curfew. And that seemed like it was probably not allowed under state law, but I didn't know. So I didn't know how to get a copy of the law, and then I needed a copy of the city code, but I couldn't get a copy of that. So I finally persuaded the city to give me a copy of the city laws, which was normally $120, but I was annoying enough as a 16-year-old that they gave it to me. I bummed the use of page-feeding scanners around downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, where I'm from, and over the course of months, until I had all the laws scanned in, turned them into Word and RTF files, and set up a website where you could look at the law. And then started converting them into HTML, only to realize that it was immediately out of date, because of course City Council continued to meet. And perhaps even more harmful than not having laws online was having inaccurate laws online. And I had no mechanism to maintain it, and I gave up. And we did take the curfew case all the way to the Supreme Court, though. We lost, but oh well. It was a good run. But that was my first exposure to this notion that government is holding on to data not to be selfish, but just out of a lack of awareness that should be public and should be available, and I felt that it should go up on the www, as we called it at the time. And I continued along that work as a hobby ever since. So I've run some open data sites in Virginia for about a decade now, putting legal data online, laws, even unusual, speaking of cow branding, I also have like the dangerous dog registry for Virginia. I turned into JSON so you could find out where the dangerous dogs are and so on. So as the aforementioned brief stint at the White House, after which I was asked by a few people to get set up a US equivalent of the London-based Open Data Institute. It's an organization in the UK started by several people 2 years ago this month to act as an intermediary between the public sector and the private sector, promoting the values of open data and helping to spread best practices and act as a connector between them, sometimes an intermediary to help both sides understand each other better and things like this. So we started the US Open Data Institute in January of this year, and our job is to move that work forward. So we have a website at usodi.org, and our job is to work with government and to a lesser extent the private sector to facilitate the production of open data and the consumption of open data. So we write software to that end, we advise governments to that end. There are, probably a few dozen governments at all levels that we talk with every few weeks at least to help make sure that they're on the right path to open data and they're getting their questions answered and so on. And it's funded by the Sloan Foundation and primarily by the Jonathan James L. Knight Foundation. So that's the part I didn't lead with, and I hope it wasn't too boring, but that's what I do, and this is my idea of a good time. So the fact that I get paid to come here and talk to you guys and my travel expenses are covered, like that's magical. Because a few years ago, I would just take a day off work to do this instead. That somebody would pay me to do this. God bless the Knight brothers for starting the Knight Foundation, so I could talk to you about this today.
Just a quick question. I'm David Stevens from City University of New York. We're using a business intelligence program right now and are just starting to embark on looking at predictive analytics. And I wonder if there's use cases that there's a merger of open data and predictive analytics.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned it. Just a couple days ago, I was talking with an organization that was interested in funding a project of ours with the caveat that they wanted to turn this data repository is the wrong word, data analysis tool into a predictive analytics tool. They really want to fund this for municipal governments. This was not a market that I was aware that there was so much demand for. Overall, there's a transition that is going to need to happen in open data, and it is bound to happen, that 5 or 10 years from now, I think we're going to look back at gatherings like this and think, oh, that was adorable. We all got together and talked about open data, and we put CSV files on our website, and a lot of us did this because we loved it. That'll probably look a little silly by then, because right now, there's an extent to which we're doing open data for the sake of open data, for the promise of something. We don't really know what it is yet. We have some ideas, but we think it's going to be good. And instead, we need to move to a healthier model of demand-based, where so many cities have things like predictive analytics tools that feed on data. They need this data. So right now, we want these predictive analytics tools to exist because we have the data to power them now. Well, that's great. But overall, I think we need to see a change so that imagine the next presidency. Whoever's in the White House next, we have no idea who it'll be, and we have no idea what they're going to think about open data. But there's a real possibility that whoever that is going to say, I don't really care about this open data thing. I get that it was a big thing for President Obama, but I'm done. Well, open data on a federal level exists at the whims of the White House, except for the Data Act for financial data. Congress has supported none of this, has taken no action to keep this going. So we're going to see a transition where if the next president did that, you would see places like PricewaterhouseCoopers come in and say, what? You can't, no, we need that so badly. We use open data to make all of our decisions. It informs, it's our structure for the data, for the decisions we make about what to invest in and trends and advice to clients. We can't possibly get by without it. Very much along these same lines are things like predictive analytic tools, where we can see how we're going to get there. And when we do get there, instead of wanting to push open data out instead of finding open data that's useful, it's all going to reverse. And you won't be able to handle all the emails that you get from consulting firms and from government at all levels, and certainly from investment houses saying, please, we need this data, we need that data. It's essential to how we do business. We have to get it.
Okay, I think we've got time for just one more question for Waldo before we take a quick break. Any final questions?
One here.
Hi, I'm Wade Holland from Montgomery County, Maryland. As a user of data, I had a question for you.
Wait, Montgomery, aren't you guys doing amazing things with open data?
Sure, it's actually that guy. I don't do any of it.
Yeah, you have like a staff of multiple people working on this, and yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard it's awesome. All right, good to meet you.
So I work with a lot of the departments trying to figure and categorize their data sets. And a lot of them you get the feedback of, why are we doing this? Who's going to ever want to look at the SCBA fit test results online?
Or cow brands.
Yeah, or cow branding. How would you respond to departments who are kind of skeptical of open data, or does it just matter that's out there?
I think they're right. And I think frequently our inability to answer those with anything other than broad platitudes is our failing and not theirs. I think it behooves us to find those use cases up front. It is, if they're cooperative departments or agencies who are enthusiastic about open data, then you can afford to be experimental. Then you can afford to say, well, hey, let's try it. I know nobody's going to use this, but let's try it and see what happens. But if it's a dubious department, a good way to start is to say, what do people FOIA all the time? What are you totally sick of getting FOIA requests for? Oh, great, let's put that up. So then you're solving a problem for them. Then you're reducing the annoying question they get. Or, if you can get the sort of access to department, ask around, what sort of data are you sick of being asked for from other departments? What are you emailed for once a week, twice a week, 5 times a week? They would just be easier if we would just publish so that they would stop asking you. So if you can solve actual problems for them, that's a sustainable approach to the publication of open data in a way that, we think this is kind of cool, please let us have it. Not only is it not sustainable, but I think it could be actively unhelpful. As fun as it can be, and as much as I enjoy saying, no, I just think this is cool. I just think this data is interesting and people will use it. Well, maybe, or maybe not. But if you can solve actual problems with open data, solve problems not in the abstract, not for third-party geeks like me, but solve actual problems for individuals in government. You can say, I have made your job easier, and I'm going to make your life easier with this solution that I'm putting into place with open data. That's sustainable. Thank you all for your time. Really enjoyed speaking to you.
Give Waldo a hand. Thank you all.